Brisbane and Perth. These two cities are by far and away the most popular cities for investors at this point in time. So I've decided to analyze each of these major capital cities. We will be looking at past performance, current market dynamics, and forecast future growth in these cities. So if you're looking to invest in Australia, let's unpack which of these two cities offers a brighter future for you and your hard-earned cash. Round 1. Past performance. Past performance is not an indicator of future performance, but it can be very useful in unpacking what's happened in Perth and in Brisbane and where they might be heading. We've seen explosive growth across all capital cities and major regional markets over the last few years with the COVID boom. But we want to take a look back a little further than that to see how each of these markets have grown, whether they've been stagnant or when they've had large periods of growth, to forecast when that future growth might be down the track. I think we're moving into a time where each city is going to have its more localized property cycle. We're no longer going through a period where every city is booming. Each city is now moving back into its common cycle and its own trend moving forward. Now, Brisbane's property market has been on fire. We've seen over the last few years upwards of 50 to 60% growth in property prices. But are there still legs in the Brisbane market? And what do the historical factors say? Over the last 30 years, property prices in Brisbane have increased 340%. So if you're one of those baby boomers who bought a house for $100,000 and now you're sitting probably on $800 to $1 million, you're sitting pretty. The previous highest rate of growth in the Brisbane market was seen over a decade between 2002 and 2012, which even saw property prices progress through the global financial crisis. The values in this period of time increased by 74% over the decade. Now, between 1992 and 2002, prices increased by 49%. And over the most recent decade, we saw Brisbane property prices grow by another 71%. So very similar to that 2002 to 2012 period, as we saw at 2012 to 2023. Now, the dollar value of the average property over this 30-year period was an increase of $700,000. If you have a chat with your parents or grandparents who bought a property, whether it was in Brisbane or another major city across Australia 10 to 20 to 30 years ago, and you told them back then that they were going to see $700,000 of growth in the market, they would have told you that you were crazy. But that is the power of compound growth on a leveraged asset, and that's why property is so popular to invest in here in Australia. Now, Perth, on the other hand, historically has been a little bit more wobbly than Brisbane. Now, Perth's growth might not have been as explosive as Brisbane's. It's been a bit more of a stagnant market. It's also performed well over that 30-year period of time, and it's more affordable than Brisbane. Perth's housing values over a 30-year period increased by 303%, which equates to roughly 4.8% compounding per annum. Now, over the last decade, they've seen less growth in the Perth housing market. In the most recent decade, we saw 14% growth. In the decade prior to that, between 2002 and 2012, there was 104% growth. And in the decade before that, between 1992 and 2002, there was growth of 73%. Now, based on all these historical numbers, Brisbane over a 30-year period has grown at roughly 5.1%, while Perth has grown at 4.7%. But comparing the most recent decades, Brisbane has had far more growth over the last 10 years as compared to Perth, which has had more stagnant growth. Now, this could be why a lot of property investors have been speculating on the Perth property market. And I get asked almost every day of the week, as a Brisbane buyer's agent, what I think of Perth and comparing it to Brisbane, hence today's video. And if you stick around to the end of this video, I'll share with you my true thoughts of how I really feel about the Perth versus the Brisbane market. But unpacking the historical data, we can see that Brisbane has had more significant growth relative to Perth over a 30-year period, sitting at 5.1% per annum versus 4.7% per annum in Perth. But over the last decade, there's been a lot less growth in Perth compared to Brisbane. And this could be why property investors and potentially homeowners moving interstate or from overseas have decided that Perth is the right market for them, because it's currently more affordable for the average property and it hasn't had strong growth in the last 10 years, and therefore people are expecting stronger growth in this next 10-year period. Now we've unpacked past performance, let's talk about current market sentiment. Now, current market sentiment is more around speculation. What are the articles saying online? What are other YouTubers saying? Where are people spending their money? Where are the median prices growing on the ground today based on the last 3 to 6 months of data? So we can get that look and feel of each of the cities, both in Brisbane and in Perth, and where the markets are moving right now. From the start of this year, both the markets have seen a significant jump in interest. We saw a lull in November, December of 2023 as people were probably getting their ducks in a row, enjoying time with the family, maybe winding down from work, and there was less interest in the property market. Now there's more confidence back in the property market. People are believing that interest rates have hit their peak, and now people have more confidence in our economy. They're looking at their lending capacity and going out there into the market, whether they're buying their own home or an investment property. Brisbane's current economy is being fueled by infrastructure projects. The Brisbane market has a diverse range of industries and a very strong job market. This is attracting talent from both overseas and interstate, hence why Brisbane has one of the largest interstate migration numbers in the last 3, 6, and 12 months. Now, Perth's economy is less diverse in terms of its industries compared to Brisbane. It's been more reliant on the resource sector over the last 30 years, and that's not really expected to change in the next decade. While this has its advantages because Perth has been so strong in the mining and resource sector, it also has its drawbacks, as the city can be far more impacted by commodity prices, what's going on in China and overseas in terms of the demand for these minerals and resources. Perth does have a number of other diverse industries in their economy, but Perth is a little more isolated compared to the East Coast and the other major capital cities here in Australia. Now, if you've been following the news or watching YouTube videos about these two cities, you can see they've been hot topics over the last 12 to 24 months. So let's dive into round 3 and talk about forecast future growth. Now, when we're talking about future growth, I think we need to define it into 2 areas: short-term market growth and long-term market growth. Let's define short-term market growth as 1 to 2 years and long-term market growth as between 3 to 10 years. So we're covering the next decade. Now, what I'd like to do is see what the banks and the economists are saying about each of these major capital cities over these periods of time to see what the market is speculating about the forecast future growth of Brisbane and Perth. Now, in the next 12 months, ANZ, CBA, Westpac, and PropTrack are forecasting somewhere between 6 to 10% growth in Brisbane in 2024. Now, looking at Perth's next 12 months, Westpac and some of the other economists are forecasting around 6 to 9% growth, and even some forecasts as high as 11% for Perth's market over the next 12 months. So looking at those range of estimates over the next 12 months, and you could probably extrapolate that out over the next 24 months, we're expecting somewhere between, say, 5 to 10% in both the Perth and the Brisbane market, which is why it's so important to choose the right property for the right price in the right location, because no two properties are the same, and those are averages on averages in each of the Perth and the Brisbane markets. Some areas will grow by 15%, while other areas might not grow at all. You need to look at the supply and demand equation in those locations, the affordability, the price points. There's so many factors you need to consider when making an investment decision or even looking at your own home. Now, before we unpack the long-term potential of these markets, let's discuss the median price points at this point in time. Brisbane's median price point as of December 2023, so only a few months ago, was $888,285. Whereas Perth's median price point as of December 2023 was $742,390. So you can see that Brisbane's roughly $140,000 more expensive at the median value level for a house. I've seen and heard of prices in Perth as low as $300,000 to $400,000 for houses. Whereas in Brisbane, you'd be lucky to break into the Brisbane or the Greater Brisbane market at a $500,000 price point now for a house. So Perth is currently cheaper at a median price point, which may attract more investors who are looking to break into the market and buy at a lower price point for a house. This is something you need to consider when you're weighing up Perth versus Brisbane. What is the median price point? What price point am I looking at? And what is the short and the long-term growth of these locations based on the fundamentals? Now, Emily and I have bought several houses here in the Brisbane market ourselves, and our purchase prices were $800,000, $544,000, and $680,000, which would all be middle and higher priced properties in the Perth market, not cheapy properties around that $400 to $500K mark. So what are the banks, economists, and most importantly, while you're here, I'm sure, what is my opinion on the Brisbane versus the Perth market over the long term and at this point in time? Looking at the long-term growth over the next decade, I'm expecting Brisbane and Perth to perform well. Both of the cities are more affordable than a lot of other Australian markets in Sydney and Melbourne, so they have that relative affordability, especially at that housing level. In Sydney, the median house in December 2023 was $1.59 million. In Melbourne, it was over $1 million. And in Adelaide, it was at $875K, and Canberra was $1 million. So when you compare Brisbane and Perth to the other major capital cities, Brisbane and Perth are still relatively more affordable compared to those other major markets. Over the next 10 years, I expect we could go back and revert to the mean, revert to those long-term averages, so 5% compounding growth year on year. But depending on the property, depending on the street, depending on the suburb, you could see growth upwards of 6, 7, 8, 9%. I like to run my own numbers at, say, that 5 to 6% mark for long-term averages. We're not going to see growth year on year at that 5% mark running in a nice straight line. Each of these markets is going to go through periods of growth and periods of stagnation. Now, what do I think as a Brisbane-based buyer's agent who's bought over $50 million worth of property for myself and clients? What do I think of the Brisbane versus Perth debate? I think they both have their own merit. I think Perth does look like a decent market. There's been a lot of investor speculation, which worries me in areas like Rockingham and things like that, at those cheaper price points, that those areas are being driven by investors. So I'd be wary of that, and I'd be looking to buy more quality, more blue chip stock, depending on my serviceability and depending on the lending that I can get, interest rates, and obviously value add potential and things like that. Now, when I'm looking at the Brisbane market, I'm looking at the jobs, the infrastructure growth, the diverse economy, and the fact that Brisbane's expected to have another 1 million people move into this market over the next decade. Those are the critical factors for me driving growth here into the Brisbane market. Now, running purpose property, what we're looking for as buyer's agents is limited land supply, fundamentals for growth, looking at both quantitative and qualitative factors to make an educated and an informed decision. So we're looking for areas that are built up. We want them to be at least 30 years old, established suburbs with infrastructure, maybe future projects, access to the CBD or the coastlines or the bayside. We're looking at lifestyle factors at schools, at medium price points, at affordability, at value add potential. There's such a long list of things that you need to unpack when you're looking at your own home or an investment property purchase. But based on all of these factors, looking at Brisbane having a more diverse economy, more infrastructure spending, both from the state and federal governments, the 2032 Olympic Games with the icing on top or the cherry on the cake there, and the fact that we're going to see both overseas and interstate migration growing here over the next decade, that's why I've decided to put my money where my mouth is. Emily and I have roughly $3.5 million worth of property here in the Brisbane market. And so I'm back in the Brisbane market over the next decade by putting my money on the table and investing in this market. Now, Perth might absolutely be a great option for some people. When I sit down and chat with people in our free strategy sessions and they ask me this question, Brisbane or Perth, I'm honest in saying that both markets have their pros and cons, and it's up to you to decide. If you do decide that Brisbane is the right place for you, then you should head over to purposeproperty.com.au to book in a free strategy session with myself where we can discuss buying your own home or an investment property. We're local area experts here in the Brisbane market. Like I said, we've got skin in the game ourselves with roughly $3.5 million here in this market. I'm a chartered accountant by trade, so we can sit down and run your numbers for a potential property purchase, looking at your serviceability and your borrowing capacity and how you can build out a property portfolio. And most importantly, we're on the ground. We physically inspect properties. I personally attend building and pest inspections. So if you're looking for a buyer's agent to help you secure a property here in Brisbane, head over to purposeproperty.com.au. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Are you picking Brisbane or Perth to buy your next property? And if you want to see me unpack and share some addresses of some recent client purchase examples, click this playlist over here. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.